Dorothy Bennett wiped her hands on her apron and glanced around the small kitchen of the Willowbrook Community Rehabilitation Center. The familiar hum of the old fridge and the faint aroma of freshly brewed tea filled the air. It was a modest place tucked away in the rolling hills of Wiltshire, where Dorothy had worked as a cook for nearly 10 years. Every morning she arrived early, preparing simple but nourishing meals for the center's residents, mostly elderly people recovering from illness or injury. Yet, despite her dedication, Dorothy felt a growing restlessness inside her. She dreamed of opening a small cafe in the village, a warm and welcoming spot where the elderly could gather, share stories, and find comfort beyond their medical treatments. The problem was money. The center ran on a tight budget, and Dorothy's wages barely covered her own needs. Still, her spirit was unbroken. She scribbled notes and ideas in a worn notebook, imagining menus, decorations, and events. One day, she hoped, her dream would come true. Meanwhile, her granddaughter Emily was about to start her new job as a nurse at Willowbrook. Emily had always admired her grandmother's kindness and hard work, and she felt proud to follow in her footsteps by caring for the residents. Yet, Emily was also aware of the challenges they faced: underfunding, staff shortages, and the ever-growing demand for quality care. That afternoon, as Dorothy prepared the evening meal, she caught sight of Emily arriving in her crisp uniform. Their eyes met, and a quiet smile passed between them. Neither spoke of the hardships yet, but both held a secret hope that together, they might change things for the better. Outside, the sun began to set behind the hills, casting a golden glow over Willowbrook. The day was ending, but for Dorothy and Emily, a new journey was just beginning. It had only been Emily's third day at Willowbrook, but the walls already felt heavy with stories they couldn't tell. Dorothy watched from the kitchen as Emily moved through the halls, clipboard in hand, assisting the elderly with grace far beyond her years. She had always been a gentle girl, quiet, observant, with a heart that seemed too big for her slight frame. Dorothy had feared that working in a place like this might harden her, but for now, Emily's kindness remained untainted. Still, something about the center had shifted. The halls of Willowbrook, usually filled with the soft murmur of television sets and gentle laughter, now held a strange tension. Dorothy had noticed it even before Emily started. Some of the residents had grown quieter, more withdrawn. A few had begun refusing meals, something unheard of during her years in the kitchen. There were occasional bruises brushed off as falls, medications that didn't seem to be administered on time, and a nervousness in the eyes of certain residents that tugged at her instinct. At first, she blamed it on her imagination. Perhaps old age was simply catching up with the residents, or perhaps the new staff didn't yet understand the rhythm of the place. But Dorothy was a woman who trusted her gut. And her gut told her that something was wrong. That afternoon, while delivering tea to Mrs. Penelope Hargreaves, a fiercely independent woman of 86 who insisted on eating biscuits with a knife and fork, Dorothy decided to gently ask. "Everything all right, love?" she said softly, setting down the tray. Penelope's eyes flicked toward the hallway, then back to Dorothy. She hesitated. "They've changed the night staff," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "The tall one, he's rough. The girl too. That's all I'll say." Dorothy frowned. "Which girl, dear?" Penelope shook her head quickly. "Doesn't matter. Just stay close at night, if you can." Dorothy left the room with a tight chest. She knew she couldn't ignore what she had just heard. But worse still, the idea that Emily might be working alongside people who mistreated residents made her stomach churn. Later that evening, the kitchen fell quiet as the sun dipped beyond the hilltops. Dorothy sat alone at the back table, her notebook open but untouched. She was deep in thought when Emily entered, her face pale and strained. "Gran," Emily said, pulling out a chair. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course, love. You know you can always talk to me." Emily bit her lip. "Have you ever seen something here that felt off?" Like someone being treated badly. One of the carers, maybe. Dorothy's heart skipped. Why do you ask? Emily looked down. It's just. I don't know if I'm imagining it. But I saw a nurse raise her voice at Mr. Thompson. She grabbed his arm too hard, I think. When I walked into the room, she stopped. Laughed. Said he was being dramatic. Dorothy leaned in. Which nurse? Emily hesitated. Her name's Rebecca. New. Blonde hair. She's friendly when people are watching. Dorothy folded her hands. It wasn't just Penelope, then. And Emily, bless her, had noticed too. Listen to me, Emily, Dorothy said carefully. If you feel something's wrong, trust your instincts. You're there to protect them. Even when it's not easy. Emily nodded, but Dorothy saw the weight in her granddaughter's eyes. She was young. She wanted to believe in goodness. But this place, this job, would test her. That night, as the lights dimmed and Willowbrook fell into uneasy silence, Dorothy lay awake in her small staff room. The center never truly slept. There were footsteps in the corridors, the occasional buzz of a call bell, and the whisper of the wind through the old windows. Dorothy made a decision. If there was something happening, she would find out. For the residents. For Emily. And for the place she had given a decade of her life to. She took out an old camcorder from the drawer beneath her bed. It had been gathering dust since her late husband passed away, but still worked fine. She checked the battery, slipped in a fresh tape, and tucked it into her handbag. The next morning, she would begin recording. Not in secret, but discreetly, her own eyes, her own hands, and if necessary, her own voice telling the story no one else dared to. The next morning dawned unusually still. A blanket of mist hung over the moors outside Willowbrook, softening the outlines of the distant hills. Dorothy stood by the kitchen window, cradling her tea. The camcorder, tucked carefully into her handbag, felt heavier than it should, as if it knew the weight of what it was about to capture. Emily passed through the kitchen just after breakfast, her face tired but determined. She gave Dorothy a small nod, unspoken confirmation that she, too, was alert. The silent alliance between them had formed without words, born from a mutual understanding that something was wrong and that they couldn't ignore it any longer. Dorothy began her quiet surveillance that day. She didn't walk about with the camcorder openly, but rather turned it on during her breaks, when she sat in the corner of the recreation room, pretending to flip through a magazine. From her vantage point, she could observe staff, residents, and the general atmosphere of the building. But what she noticed most was what wasn't there. Smiles were few and far between. Residents flinched when approached from behind. Some carers were brisk, their voices clipped, and Rebecca, the blonde nurse Emily had mentioned, moved with an authority that didn't match her short tenure. She barked instructions, rolled her eyes at confused patients, and frequently vanished into a side corridor that most staff never used. Dorothy's curiosity peaked when she saw Rebecca disappear through a small door beside the linen closet. A door that, as far as she recalled, had been locked for years. That evening, as twilight painted the halls in long shadows, Dorothy approached the door. It was slightly ajar. She glanced around, quiet. Inside, the room was cramped and dimly lit. Old filing cabinets lined one wall, and dust-coated medical carts were stacked along the other. In the center sat a small table with a single chair and a tray of used syringes. Dorothy's skin prickled. Why would syringes be left here, away from the proper medical stations? The room wasn't sterile. It wasn't even clean. Footsteps echoed in the corridor, and Dorothy ducked out, closing the door silently behind her. Her heart thudded, and for the first time in years, she felt the sting of fear clawing up her spine. Back in her room, she rewound the camcorder's footage. Though blurry in parts, It had captured snippets of Rebecca snapping at a resident and pushing a tea trolley recklessly, nearly tipping it. There was nothing concrete yet. But it was a start. Later that night, Emily knocked gently on her door. "I've just come from room 9, she said. "Mr. Alcott." Dorothy looked up. "Is he all right?" Emily's voice lowered. "He's confused. Disoriented. Says he was given his sleeping pills twice today." Dorothy's breath caught. "That could be dangerous, Emily." "I know. And when I checked the medicine chart, someone had altered the log. With different handwriting." Dorothy set the camcorder aside and stood. "We need to speak to someone." "But who?" Emily asked, frustration in her eyes. "The head nurse is off until Monday. And I don't trust Rebecca." They sat in silence for a moment. "There's someone," Dorothy said finally. "Mr. Hughes. Maintenance. He's been here longer than I have. Knows every wall and wire. He doesn't say much, but he sees everything. And more importantly, he listens." The following afternoon, they found Mr. Hughes in the boiler room, tinkering with an ancient panel. "I was wondering when you'd come to me," he muttered without looking up. Dorothy blinked. "Pardon?" He looked up, wiping his hands on a rag. "It's been going on for months now. But it's not easy to prove. Unless you're recording it." Dorothy's eyes narrowed. "You knew?" He nodded slowly. "I've seen too much. Heard cries at night. Found discarded meds in the bins. But without names and dates, nobody listens." Dorothy exchanged a look with Emily. "Then help us." Mr. Hughes stood fully now. "There's a second key to that side room. And something tells me what's in there is worse than just poor manners." He handed Dorothy an old staff key fob. "Don't go in during daylight. Cameras in the hallway are patched into the admin system. But at night, after 10, they stop recording. It's a loophole they've never fixed." That night, after the building settled into hush, Dorothy crept down the corridor. The key fob buzzed softly against the door's lock. She slipped inside. The room smelled of antiseptic and something else, chemical, sharp. In the far corner sat a locked cabinet. And beside it, a clipboard. The names on the sheet made Dorothy's breath freeze. Alcott. Penelope. Jean Traver. Next to each name, dates. Notes. Dosages. The handwriting didn't match official records. Dorothy backed out slowly, locking the door behind her. She now had proof. But the question remained, how deep did it go? The days at Willowbrook began to feel colder, though the calendar said it was only early October. It wasn't the wind slipping through the windows or the grey drizzle that kissed the moors each morning. It was something else, something heavier. Dorothy spent her nights restlessly now, unable to sleep after what she'd seen in the locked room. She would lie awake, staring at the cracked ceiling, her thoughts racing through the names on the clipboard. Those weren't just names. They were people she saw every day. People she had laughed with, eaten with, comforted through stormy nights. And now they were part of something she didn't yet fully understand. The footage she recorded that night was hidden inside her dresser drawer, wrapped in an old scarf. She knew she couldn't bring it to the authorities without more context. It would be her word against her trained nurses, and Rebecca, for all her malice, was smart. Clever enough to cover her tracks. The next morning, she found Emily in the staff pantry, arms crossed tightly, eyes darting at every passing shadow. Penelope's room was empty, Emily said without preamble. Her bed stripped. Her name's off the door. Dorothy's stomach twisted. She was there yesterday. Emily nodded. I asked, discreetly. Rebecca said Penelope was transferred for specialist care. But there was no ambulance. No paperwork in the admin folder. Dorothy didn't need to speak. The look between them was enough. Penelope hadn't been transferred. She'd disappeared. That same afternoon, Dorothy spotted Mr. Hughes in the courtyard, mending a rusted bench with a stubborn wrench. She approached slowly, her cardigan drawn tightly around her frame. "She's gone, isn't she?" she asked quietly. Mr. Hughes paused, resting a hand on the worn wood. "That's the third in 2 months. All transferred, none returned." Dorothy sank onto the bench beside him. "What are they doing to them?" Mr. Hughes hesitated. "I'm not certain. But I suspect medication. Too much of it. Maybe to sedate them. Maybe worse." Dorothy felt bile rise in her throat. "Why?" "They're the ones with no family. No visitors. No complaints." A silence fell between them, thick as smoke. That evening, Dorothy resumed filming, this time from her doorway, using the zoom feature to catch glimpses through the corridor. She recorded as much as she could, staff movements, how long Rebecca lingered in certain rooms, the strange patterns in shift handovers. Then, just past midnight, a sound reached her ears. Whispering. She crept from bed, easing the door open a crack. 2 voices, Rebecca's and someone else's, echoed faintly through the corridor. "I told you to change the dosage, not stop it altogether." She was lucid this morning. "She's 78, for God's sake." What does it matter? It matters because we can't have them talking. If she remembers what happened in the East Wing. The voices drifted away, swallowed by the hallway's darkness. Dorothy stepped back, pulse hammering. East Wing. No residents were kept there now. It had been sealed off after the storm last year, declared under refurbishment. But maybe that was just another lie. The following day, Dorothy and Emily hatched a plan. "You distract Rebecca at lunchtime," Dorothy whispered, "while I try the East Wing. I've got the spare key from Mr. Hughes." Emily nodded, though her hands trembled slightly. "Be careful." As noon approached, Dorothy waited until the halls were at their busiest. She slipped down the back corridor, the old key fob clenched in her palm. The door to the East Wing was dusty, its window blacked out with paint. She unlocked it slowly and stepped inside. The air was stale and humid. Lights flickered overhead. And the silence, it wasn't empty. It throbbed. She passed abandoned wheelchairs, unplugged monitors, and torn upholstery. Then, at the far end, she found a door slightly ajar. It led to a room lined with beds, each one curtained off. Machines hummed softly. And in the farthest bed, a figure stirred. It was Penelope. Dorothy rushed over. Her old friend looked pale, thinner, but her eyes fluttered open. "Dorothy!" she rasped. "I'm here," Dorothy whispered, gripping her hand. "What happened to you?" They said I was sick. But I never felt sick. Then, injections. I slept. Too long. Too much. I couldn't wake." Dorothy blinked back tears. "You're going to be all right now." But Penelope's eyes widened. "No, you must go. If they find you here." Footsteps echoed behind her. Dorothy froze. She turned slowly. Rebecca stood in the doorway, arms crossed, a knowing smile playing on her lips. "Well, aren't you the curious one?" Dorothy squared her shoulders, heart pounding. "You're hurting people." Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "I'm helping them. You've no idea how difficult it is to run a place like this. So many bodies. So little time. Some lives are just extra. You're a monster." Rebecca chuckled softly. "Maybe. But monsters survive. Do-gooders like you. They vanish. Just like Penelope almost did." Dorothy's breath caught. Rebecca stepped forward. Let's go, dear. Time for your medication. Dorothy's heart hammered as Rebecca advanced toward her with a syringe gleaming under the flickering light. Instinct took over. She ducked sideways, knocking over a metal tray that clattered loudly against the linoleum floor. The sound echoed through the empty East Wing corridor like a gunshot. Rebecca's smile faltered, her eyes narrowing. You really think you can expose us? She hissed. Dorothy backed away, her breath shallow and rapid. She fumbled in her cardigan pocket, fingers brushing the small recorder she had used earlier. I won't let you keep hurting them. Rebecca's lips curled into a cruel grin. You have no idea what you're up against. Willowbrook is more than a care home. It's a fortress. Suddenly, footsteps pounded from the hallway. Voices shouted. Mrs. Radcliffe! What are you doing here? Emily burst into the room, flanked by 2 security guards. We're here to help. Rebecca's expression darkened. She dropped the syringe, hands raised mockingly. Fine. You win this round. The guards moved quickly to restrain her, but Rebecca slipped past them with alarming speed, disappearing into the shadowy halls. Dorothy sank onto the floor beside Penelope, relief washing over her. You're safe now. Penelope nodded weakly. Thank you. I thought no one would come. That night, back in her small flat in Bath, Dorothy replayed the footage over and over. She couldn't shake the image of Rebecca's cold eyes or Penelope's frail frame. The next morning, the local newspaper arrived with a headline that made Dorothy's blood run cold. Willowbrook Care Home under investigation, allegations of elder abuse emerge. Her phone rang shortly after. Mrs. Radcliffe. Detective Inspector Collins here. We've reviewed your evidence. Can we meet? Dorothy swallowed hard, knowing her battle had just begun. The cafe where Dorothy agreed to meet Detective Inspector Collins was small and quiet, tucked away in a cobbled street of Bath's Old Town. The scent of freshly ground coffee mingled with the faint murmur of patrons chatting. Despite the calm atmosphere, Dorothy's nerves were a tempest. D.I. Collins, a tall man in his early 40s with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, gestured to a corner table. Thank you for coming, Mrs. Radcliffe. Your evidence has been crucial. Dorothy nodded, clutching her handbag tightly. I'm relieved it's finally being taken seriously. Collins leaned in, voice low. The abuse you exposed is worse than we feared. Willowbrook's management has been systematically covering it up. How could they? I saw how they treated Penelope and the others. It was inhumane. There are layers to this, Mrs. Radcliffe. Financial fraud, bribery, even falsified medical records. Some staff are involved deeply. Dorothy's mind raced. My granddaughter Eleanor, she was part of it, wasn't she? Collins gave a solemn nod. She was complicit, yes. We're building a case. Dorothy felt a pang of sorrow mixed with anger. I never imagined she would hurt the very people she was supposed to care for. The detective paused, then added, your bravery in going undercover helped us catch them off guard. Without you, this might have gone unnoticed for years. Outside, the autumn leaves swirled in the chilly breeze. Dorothy looked up, determination settling in her gaze. This is just the beginning. For Penelope and everyone else, I will see this through. That evening, back at her flat, Dorothy prepared a letter addressed to Eleanor. It was not a letter of blame, but a plea for truth and reconciliation. Dear Eleanor, she began, there is a chance to make things right. I hope you will find the courage to face what you've done and seek forgiveness. As the night deepened, Dorothy knew the path ahead was uncertain and difficult. But for the sake of justice and healing, she would walk it with unwavering resolve. Days passed, and the tension between Dorothy and Eleanor grew heavier than the thick autumn fog blanketing Bath. Eleanor had not replied to the letter, nor answered her calls. Each silence cut deeper than the last, stirring a storm of conflicting emotions in Dorothy's heart. One chilly afternoon, as Dorothy sorted through old photographs, a sudden knock startled her. She opened the door to find Eleanor standing there, her eyes swollen from tears. I needed time," Eleanor whispered, voice trembling. "But I can't run anymore." Dorothy stepped aside, inviting her in. The warmth of the flat contrasted starkly with the cold between them. Eleanor sank onto the worn armchair. "I was scared of facing what I'd done. The money, the lies, the pain. I never wanted to hurt Grandma Penelope." Dorothy sat opposite her, hands folded. "You did hurt her. But now, you have a chance to make amends." Eleanor's tears spilled freely. "I want to help. I want to fix this. But I don't know where to start." Dorothy reached out, gently squeezing Eleanor's hand. "Truth is the first step. We'll work with D.I. Collins. Together, we can bring justice and healing." Their fragile reconciliation was a beacon in the dark. Yet, the path ahead was tangled with challenges, legal battles, public scrutiny, and mending the fractured trust within their family. In the following weeks, Eleanor met with investigators, confessing her role in the abuse and providing crucial information on the corrupt staff and management. The media caught wind of the scandal, and headlines spread like wildfire across the UK. Public outrage mounted as more survivors came forward, emboldened by the courage of Dorothy and her granddaughter. One evening, as Dorothy watched the sunset over the River Avon, she felt a cautious hope. The fight was far from over, but at least the truth was no longer hidden in shadows. For her, for Penelope, and for every vulnerable soul at Willowbrook, this was a new beginning. The trial of Willowbrook Care Centre's staff and management began on a crisp spring morning in Bath. The courtroom was packed with reporters, family members of victims, and supporters of Dorothy and Eleanor. The air buzzed with anticipation, the weight of truth pressing heavily on every shoulder. Dorothy sat quietly beside Eleanor, their hands intertwined. They had come a long way, from silence and secrets to standing together, united in the quest for justice. The prosecution presented a damning case. Evidence collected through Dorothy's brave undercover work and Eleanor's candid testimony painted a grim picture of neglect and abuse. Former staff members confessed to their roles, revealing a web of corruption that extended beyond the care home. Eleanor's voice trembled but held steady as she spoke of her remorse and determination to make amends. "I failed those in my care. I am deeply sorry and want to help ensure this never happens again." Outside the courtroom, survivors and their families found solace in knowing the truth was out. Campaigns for better care standards gained momentum nationwide, driven by the courage of one grandmother and her granddaughter. After weeks of testimonies and deliberations, the court delivered its verdict. The guilty were sentenced to prison, and the care center's license was revoked. A new facility, with strict oversight, was established to care for Bath's elderly with dignity and respect. Dorothy and Eleanor visited Penelope together one bright afternoon. The frail woman smiled weakly but her eyes sparkled with gratitude. "Thank you, my dear ones. You have given us back our voices." As they walked away, Dorothy felt a deep peace. The journey had been painful, but from the ashes rose healing and hope. This was more than a victory. It was a testament to the power of truth, love, and courage to change lives, and to protect the vulnerable.